This Week with George Stephanopoulos starts right now.
Stark warning. Why was it the women in the Trump White House that led the way on this?
I don't think it's in any of our constitutions to be able to lie about what we witnessed.
Our exclusive interview with 3 Trump White House staffers who spoke out against the president they served after January 6th.
I knew that I would have to defend that, and I couldn't live with myself.
There was never a second guess of whether it was right or wrong.
What their message is going into 2024. We begin today with a This Week exclusive as we approach the 3-year mark since the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. My conversation with 3 young women who worked in Donald Trump's White House and answered the call when it came time to tell the truth about what they witnessed when Trump tried to upend the 2020 presidential election. Former January 6th committee Vice Chair Liz Cheney singled out these young women as truth tellers after they provided some of the most compelling testimony of her committee's historic hearings.
And I will tell you, it is especially the young women. Young women who seem instinctively to understand the peril of this moment for our democracy. And young women who know that it will be up to them to save it. And I have been incredibly moved by young women that I have met and that have come forward to testify.
For a Republican, speaking the truth about Donald Trump, a man who has vowed retribution against those who have betrayed him, can be dangerous, especially if you worked for him. Despite that, these young women went public, even as many of the men they worked with, some in more senior positions, stayed silent or actively enabled and excused Trump's actions. Now, for the first time, they sat down together to tell the story behind their story and the threats they face and still face today. It's a fascinating conversation.
Some of the most compelling testimony of the January 6th committee came from women in their 20s who were working just steps away from the Oval Office when the pro-Trump mob stormed the U.S. Capitol. Sarah Matthews, the deputy press secretary, who was just 25 years old when she resigned that night.
I motioned up at the TV and I said, "Do you think it looks like we're effing winning? Because I don't think it does."
And Cassidy Hutchinson, the 24-year-old top aide to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, whose riveting testimony was front-page news across the country.
She testified today that a number of people inside that White House knew in the days leading up to January 6th that this could be dangerous.
Jaw-dropping testimony here in Washington.
This testimony is stunning.
A complete game changer.
A portrait of a president who was completely and utterly out of control.
And there was the woman who brought them both to the committee, Alyssa Farah Griffin, who left the Trump administration on December 4th, 2020, after serving multiple high-level roles.
Both of these women made such a profound impact on how I ended up viewing all of this. And, you know, I wouldn't be here with you today if it wasn't for Alyssa and Sarah and Liz Cheney and January 6th committee.
And playing that incredible role you played.
Mr. Cipollone said something to the effect of, "Please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. Keep in touch with me. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen."
It was the emotional, dramatic highlight of that entire committee.
I appreciate you saying that, but I think that there's everybody's testimony that came forward and provided truthful information was incredibly important, and I just feel like I don't deserve the credit for that. Again, like Alyssa and Sarah are.
If I may say, if I can say, there's critical parts of history that the public would not know if not for Cassidy Hutchinson. Other senior officials, more senior than you, witnessed them, but did not come forward. They did not testify, whether it was credible threats about the attack on the Capitol, that people showing up that day were going to be armed, that there was this scheme to try to stop the vice president from certifying. You played such a critical role in telling the truth there, and I will never not be angry that people senior to us did not step forward and tell the truth and realize what a vital part of not just American history, but preserving this country, telling the truth is.
Really, you're being humble, but you deserve so much credit for the courage that took, because like you said, I think all of the witnesses who came forward faced
scrutiny and threats and harassment, but yours was to the next level because of the bombshell type of information that you had.
All of you faced massive blowback. What happened to you, like, after you resigned, after you came out and said what you said and ultimately cooperated with the committee? What kind of threats did you face?
I think after resigning, I did this after resigning and after testifying. I largely tried to tune out any media coverage, not check social media. But I think what was tough was after resigning, knowing that I upset friends who I was close to in the Trump administration.
Kayleigh McEnany, who you were her deputy. What did she say to you?
I called her on the night that I resigned on January 6th, and it was a very short convo. She said, "Okay, thank you for letting me know. I wish you well."
And that was it. You haven't talked to her since?
No, we have not spoken a word since that day. But I think that I am very at peace with that decision. And same goes for testifying before the January 6th committee. I think that I knew that I could not walk into the White House gates the next day after January 6th, especially as someone who was a spokesperson, because I knew that I would have to defend that and defend what we saw that day and his dereliction of duty. And I couldn't live with myself. And so that was why I made that decision. And then going forward to testify before the January 6th committee, I stand by that decision, even if that meant losing some friends along the way. I mean, there are very few people that I'm in touch with from the Trump admin, two of them sitting right here.
And Cassie, you faced, you lost friends and all of that, but I mean, you faced death threats. I mean, you had to leave town and get security.
I moved to Atlanta for several months.
You basically had to go into exile because of the threats you were facing.
The American people can only elect officials if they are acknowledged, if they're educated on who those people actually are. And to be able to shed light on the lack of character that Donald Trump displayed that day, the lack of leadership that he displayed that day, there was never a second guess of whether it was right or wrong. And to this day, I truly believe I gained so much more than I lost. I gained a whole new sense of community, a whole new sense of leadership, a different perspective on how our government should be run and what a responsible president actually looks like, but also on how perilous this moment we're facing as a country is.
They are all on the same page now, but as disturbed as Cassidy Hutchinson was by what she witnessed on January 6th, for a time, she remained loyal to Trump, who continues to deny he did anything wrong on that day. I want to ask you about something you wrote in your book about Alyssa. You write about coming back into the White House on January 7th, exhausted and freaked out by all that you had witnessed the day after January 6th, and you see Alyssa is on television. And she's very critical of Trump.
My phone vibrated with a text from Melissa moments after she was off the air. She apologized for not having given Mark and me a heads up and explained that she had felt compelled to say something. My phone clattered as I dropped it on my desk in disgust. She promised she wouldn't betray us. She promised she would always be loyal. I still felt that sense of loyalty to the administration, and I don't say that with pride. And that was sort of the beginning when I had these split emotions about how to actually process what happened that day and how to process my own involvement in it and what I could do moving forward. I was really upset with Alyssa on one hand because we were very, very close, and Melissa had worked for Mark Meadows before I had. So you were sort of my shepherd in a lot of ways with just helping navigate that environment, and I was so grateful for all of that. But there's also the side of me where I was really proud and somewhat envious of the courage that you displayed.
After they reconciled, it was Alyssa who would connect both Sarah and Cassidy with the committee investigating the Capitol riot.
Once the January 6th committee was stood up, Adam Kinzinger reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you be willing to meet just off the record with me and Liz Cheney?" So I did, and I've been friends with Adam and his wife for years and gave them kind of my best recollection of what I knew, but I'd left December 4th, so I didn't see a lot of that kind of critical period leading up to it. I did talk to Sarah, and I recommended to Sarah and to Congresswoman Cheney that they should connect and they should talk. And from there, they were, you were able to meet in the basement of the Capitol and
with Liz Cheney.
Yeah. So
in that she had a little basement office.
Yeah.
No windows, down an unmarked corridor.
It was all very
wires coming from the
secretive.
ceiling.
Literally, it was all very secretive too, because I think after I resigned from the Trump administration, I ended up going back to Capitol Hill and was working on Capitol Hill for a Republican there, and kind of had resumed a seemingly normal life. And it wasn't until Alyssa reached out and said, the January 6th committee is interested in talking with you. And obviously I was sympathetic to the cause because I had resigned on January 6th, but it was a largely Democrat committee. And so there was a little bit of apprehension there on my part. And she said, Liz Cheney is willing to meet with you off the record. It will just be the three of us, and it won't leak. And
so the three of you met in the basement of the Capitol.
And nothing leaked from it.
And nothing leaked
You
from
could
it.
have told me about it.
And nothing leaked from it. And we sat there for probably like, what, 4 or 5 hours or something. Wow. And I gave her my best recollection of the events leading up to January 6th and the aftermath of the election.
And the day of, that was what was most interesting, the West Wing, that people were saying, this isn't our people, this is Antifa.
Exactly. And so was able to help shed some light, but I honestly thought that that was going to be the end of it. I thought that, you know what, I don't have anything that's super compelling. I didn't talk to the president on that day. So I thought, I'm going to cooperate, of course, because I'm sympathetic to the cause, but this will probably be the end of it, and I'll point her in the right direction. And during that conversation, I said, you know who you really need to talk to next is Cassidy Hutchinson.
Those of us who were in the West Wing knew this woman had so much power, so much access, Cassidy, and visibility into things that oftentimes I would go to her to get information as the White House comms director, to know like the president's movements, the schedule. So you were really, truly a key to figuring out the events leading up to that.
So you told Liz Cheney you should really talk to Cassidy Hutchinson. Had you already given that message?
I had, and I think I had told you you should consider talking before it ultimately came together.
Yeah. Alyssa did reach out in early October of 2021. So this was about a month before I was formally subpoenaed. And I was at this really delicate point in my so-called journey in all of this where I really wanted to come forward, but I also had concerns about it. I didn't know if there would be any lasting implications, and ultimately I told Alyssa that I would talk to Liz Cheney if it meant that I wouldn't be subpoenaed, because I had been on the Mar-a-Lago payroll for several months and I hadn't found another job yet, so I didn't have a lot of, I didn't have money to pay for an attorney. And then I was subpoenaed a month later.
Why was it the women in the Trump White House that led the way on this?
For some reason, in moments that call for it, women tend to show an astonishing amount of courage. And I credit these women who are younger than me, had not as senior of titles, and stepped forward. I don't think it's in any of our constitutions to be able to lie about what we witnessed and not feel compelled to tell the public. For me, it fundamentally came down to, I want to be able to look my future kids in the eye and say, when history called for it, I did the right thing and I had the courage to do it. That matters to me more than any future, job or power structure that might exist if he's president again.
When we come back, you'll hear their warning on what they fear a second Trump term could mean for the country. We're back in just 2 minutes.
You are promising America tonight you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one.
Except
Look,
what?
he's going crazy. Except for day one.
Meaning?
I want to close the border, and I want to drill.
That's not retribution.
I'm gonna be, he keeps, I love this guy. He says, you're not gonna be a dictator, are you? I said, no, other than day one.
That was former President Trump saying he'll be a dictator on day one of his second term. Here's more of my conversation with 3 women who served in Trump's White House. What would it mean, in your mind, if Donald Trump became president again? What would a second Trump term look like?
Fundamentally, a second Trump term could mean the end of American democracy as we know it. And I don't say that lightly. We all witnessed him trying to steal a democratic election before and going to historic and unconstitutional lengths to do so. And that just shows that he's willing to basically break every barrier to get into power and to stay into power. But also, I'm very concerned about what the term would actually look like.
We don't need to speculate what a second Trump term would look like, because we already saw it play out. To this day, he still doubles down on the fact that he thinks that the election was stolen and fraudulent. And then his rhetoric has just gotten increasingly erratic. I mean, he has literally called for things like doing away with parts of the Constitution, wanting to weaponize the DOJ to enact revenge on his political enemies.
The fact that he feels that he needs to lean into being a dictator alone shows that he is a weak and feeble man who has no sense of character and integrity and has no sense of leadership.
Everyone who is in the West Wing, and frankly a lot of cabinet secretaries, they know how dangerous Trump is. People who I have the deepest level of respect for, like my former boss, Vice President Mike Pence, he's seen more than any of us have seen. He knows more than any of us know. And I would just hope in this moment when we are less than a year out from, or basically a year out from the election, that he would think about speaking out more forcefully just about the unfitness of Donald Trump. This is not about politics. It's not about policy. It is about the character of the man who's the leader of the free world.
Yeah, because even now, even 3 years later, almost, you know, there are many that haven't come out who know exactly what you all know or know more.
I think it's really easy to paint all of these Republicans with a broad brush and say that they're doing it for, you know, their own personal ambitions, which I think is a large majority of them. But I think another thing that we have to consider as a factor is that a lot of these people won't come forward, even if privately they'll acknowledge that Trump is unfit or will privately acknowledge that the 2020 election wasn't stolen. It's because they know that they will face death threats, that their families will face death threats. I knew that coming forward and speaking out against Donald Trump, I could potentially face security threats or death threats, online harassment. Despite all the personal sacrifice, I knew that ultimately it was the right thing to do. And so I just would encourage others to come forward, because we're running out of time in order to try to stop Trump from being in the Oval Office again.
His campaign theme is retribution. I mean, this is the centerpiece of his campaign. He says, I am your retribution. This is a tough question, but let me ask each of you, are you worried that you will face that retribution if he comes back in?
It is a very real concern. I've met with former cabinet secretaries very recently who are also on this, you know, potential theoretical list, and they're worried about it. Listen, I'll say this with Donald Trump is, what scares me as much as him and his retribution is the almost cult-like following he has over his most diehard supporters. The threats, the harassment, the death threats that you get when he targets you, and he's deliberate in targeting, is really horrifying and has no place in our American discourse, and it's unlike anything I've seen in the decades plus I've been in politics. I'm less worried for any like personal aspect for me, but it is, he knows how to use government better this time. He can put in diehard loyalists who can weaponize every level of government against his detractors, against the American people, against the media. It's almost too scary to fully wrap your head around what it could look like.
The American people and people in general have short memories, and so they might forget the chaos of the Trump years. And also, they might not just be paying attention to what he's saying now and the threat to democracy that exists. And so it does really concern me if he makes it to a general that he could win. And so I'm still hopeful that we can defeat him in the primary, but we're running out of time.
Our singular focus needs to be, if he is the nominee, on making sure that he is not elected the president again next November.
Even if that means electing a Democrat.
It's really disappointing, because I look at these options and I'm upset with them. But at the end of the day, I trust one person with our government and democracy than I do the other. And so I've never voted for a Democrat in my life, but I think that in this next election, I would put policy aside and choose democracy.
Right now, there's a large portion of the population that's not recognizing their mistakes, that's not working to continue to better our country. And right now, we're completely splitting down the middle. On one side, that's the truth, and that is reality. And the other side is propaganda and lies. This is a fundamental election to continue to safeguard our institutions and our constitutional republic. But if we crumble as a nation, we're setting the example for generations to come, not only in the United States, but on the global stage, that democracy is an experiment and it's not guaranteed. We're extremely fragile as a country, and so is the democratic experiment.
In response to our interview with these three women who worked in the Trump White House, the Trump campaign gave us a statement calling them, quote, ungrateful grifters who used opportunities given to them by President Trump to benefit themselves and who had gone, quote, full Judas.